Talk to us about this renaming of the agency that you once ran. The president said something interesting as he went back to the Department of War, saying that we won the First World War, we won the Second, and we won everything before that and in between. And then we decided to go woke, he said, and we changed the name to the Department of Defense. Would that suggest that those who fought in World War II, Vietnam, and other wars after 1940 were somehow woke?
Well, obviously the president likes to change names, and I understand that. But most important thing is action. It really isn't changing the name of the Pentagon. What's necessary is that the president has to pay attention to the investments that have to be made in our defense area in order to make sure that we are the strongest military power on earth. And changing the name is not going to impact on that. His actions will determine whether or not we remain the strongest power on earth. That's where he's got to focus.
Talk to us a little bit about your views on Venezuela. I mean, this is really intense commentary when it comes to flyovers, when it comes to flotilla that's there. Are we barreling towards war in the Caribbean?
Well, I think it's very important for the president at this point to be able to sit down with his key advisors and look at the situation that's developing there. Because there's no question that it's escalating and that it could become much more controversial in terms of the activities of both the United States and Venezuela. And so it is a good point to kind of sit here, sit down and take a hard look at what are the steps that are going to be taken here in dealing with Venezuela. If we're going to continue to attack ships, I think we need to have good intelligence. We need to know that we're hitting the targets that we're after. We're going to have to try to make sure that we protect our forces in that area because Venezuela, as was obvious from last night, is going to try to intimidate our forces as well. So this is a very critical moment, and I really think it's in the president's interest to have Marco Rubio, to have our military sit down and really decide what are the steps we're going to take, what are the precautions we're going to take, and ultimately what are our goals in the area.
Well, there are some questions about whether we should have blown up that boat. Mr. Secretary, I talked to Senator Mark Warner about this last evening to find out, as Vice Chair of the Intel Committee, if he had been briefed on this either before or after, knowing that the trafficking of an illegal consumer product is not a capital offense. So in this case, Congress might need to be involved unless we are, in fact, as the White House says, in a war against terror, suggesting that cartel members are terrorists. Listen to what Senator Warner said when I asked him if he had been briefed yet from the administration or could even confirm that this was a drug-running boat. Here he is.
I cannot, let me be clear. The Maduro government in Venezuela is awful. And clearly we need to do all we can to eradicate the drug cartels. But to take this action, which at least at first blush seems to be counter to the law, if we are not, as congressional oversight, not going to get the ability to do oversight and get the briefings because people are afraid of being called out by Laura Loomer or the administration doesn't want to share information, then we are in a place that's frankly unprecedented. If you got to go through a Laura Loomer litmus test before you do your oversight job, then we got a heap of trouble.
Give us your take on this, Mr. Secretary, because obviously the tradition in Washington would be to stay in touch with the members of the intel committees, if not armed services and so forth. How concerning is that the White House is acting independently here? And if you had been the Secretary of Defense, would you have blown up that boat?
It's hard to second guess something like that without knowing all the facts. And I don't know all the facts. Mm-hmm. I don't know the intelligence that the president had, and I don't know how much surveillance was done with regards to that target. But more importantly, related to Senator Warner's concerns, I really do think that the administration makes a mistake by not informing key members of the Congress when there are events like this. There was a report in the New York Times relating to an effort by the SEAL Team 6 to implant a device in North Korea. I guess this occurred in 2019, and no one was made aware of it. And the reality is that when you conduct that kind of covert and highly confidential mission, I think the law does require that you have to inform key members of Congress with regards to that effort. So I just think the administration is creating more problems for itself if it doesn't, in the very least, sit down with some of the key members and give them a heads up as to what actions are going to be taken. Because in the end, they could run into further problems with the Congress in terms of investigations, in terms of funding, and in terms of general support for the policies that I think the president wants to implement in that part of the world.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that report in the New York Times. It's an incredible read, and I think most of us would find it unrealistic if it showed up in a movie. But yes, in 2019, SEAL Team 6 apparently ended up on the ground in North Korea, launched from a nuclear submarine that got pretty darn close to the mainland. And when they thought they had been discovered, they decided to kill everyone that turned out to be, I believe now, on a fishing boat and sink their bodies into the ocean before leaving under the cover of darkness. This was SEAL Team 6. Leon Panetta, you've deployed SEAL Team 6 in the killing of Osama bin Laden. How many stories are like this that we don't know about?
Well, there are a number of missions that are conducted by the SEAL teams. A lot we don't know about because they are always covert and highly classified. But at the same time, that's the reason why it's important that they inform some of the key players on Capitol Hill when they're about to conduct that kind of mission. When it came to Osama bin Laden's raid, I personally took the opportunity to go up to the Hill and brief Mitch McConnell, brief Speaker Pelosi, briefed what it called the Gang of Eight to make them aware of the fact of what we'd found and the mission that we were about to embark on. So it is important that we follow the law, even when there are these very covert and secretive missions. I think this was the kind of effort I understand. I wasn't aware of this particular mission, but the ability to try to provide a device that would give you better intelligence on what the North Koreans are up to, I think that's worth taking because, frankly, North Korea is a very hard target, and we do not have very good intelligence on what the North Koreans are thinking. So I understand the reasons for wanting to do that.
Wow.
But not informing those that need to get that kind of information only makes it a much more controversial when the investigations are now going to be conducted.
That is fascinating to hear you say that, Mr. Secretary, that the risk was worth it, knowing that if something had gone wrong, if these SEALs had been found, North Korea could have attacked South Korea. It could have been the beginning of a world war. But that clearly outlines the stakes and the urgency here in your view. It was a very risky mission. Very frankly, the raid on bin Laden was a very risky mission. The president, to his credit, made the decision that we should go, and recognizing the risks that are involved. And frankly, that's what leadership is all about. If you're going to lead, you're going to have to take risks, particularly when it comes to the national security interests of our country.